Did you know that many Americans' voting rights were not protected until the late 1960s? During the pre-Civil War era, only white, wealthy Protestant men were allowed to vote. So to have a voice in this country, you need to be white, own property, and be Protestant. This excluded white men who did not own property and were not Protestant. However, on 1865, white men were allowed to vote in all states regardless of property ownership. However, they did still have to pay a tax in some states. Thankfully, the United States government has granted the right to vote for more than just white, rich Protestant men due to the 15th Amendment, which granted the right to vote for any race, color, or previous servitude, which included slaves, and the 19th Amendment, which granted the right to vote for women. Although voting rights in this country have significantly changed to allow most Americans to be able to participate in government, there are many barriers still set in place in order to restrict certain groups of minorities from voting. Furthermore, our nation must increase access to voting to not just citizens but for prisoners, visa holders, and in general, increase participation to get an accurate representation of the nation, not just those with access. Should we give voting rights to non-citizens of the country who hold a visa or work permit? Our understanding of citizenship has evolved over the course of the nation's history. Previously, it did not include Native Americans. On this case, Native Americans were considered not natural-born citizens due to tribal affiliation and were not protected under any amendment to have the access to vote. In the United States, persons who are not citizens are not allowed to vote unless allowed by local government. However, I wish to expand this to green card holders to be allowed to vote in every state in local elections and state elections. However, not for presidential elections. The reason for not allowing them to vote is because they are not permanent citizens and are usually in the country temporarily, which may affect our country in the long term through presidential elections. We should restore voting rights to felons and paroles, just as the state of Florida did when they created the Florida Voting Rights Restoration. In our country, African Americans account for 40% of the U.S. incarcerated population, while only accounting for 13% of the population. This has resulted in African Americans having a smaller voice due to 40% of their population being in prison and not having access to voting. One of the barriers our country has to overcome is to increase voting access. Colorado created an easier access by selling mail ballots to be sent to every registered voter for most elections and eliminated assigned polling and even did same-day registrations through IDs. In conclusion, our country began as only allowing white men with property who were Protestant the right to vote. However, due to the 15th and 19th Amendment, it has now included women and African Americans and every other race, and has now recently included Native Americans. We should allow green card, work permits, and visa holders the right to vote in state and local elections, however not for federal. And secondly, we should allow inmates the right to vote, as 40% of the African American community are incarcerated and are being disenfranchised by not having access to voting. Thirdly, we should create easier access, just like Colorado did, but we should implement it across the entire nation. Furthermore, we should just protect the right to vote and create more effective ways to do so.